Namaste students, welcome to bio class. So already we have discussed about various concepts of morphology in flowering plants. So in the text, certain other characteristic features are also noted down about the morphology of flowering plants. So in NCERT or as per the text, there are various concepts, but we have discussed only some of the concepts. This is mainly because in this particular year or as per the current syllabus, some of the concepts have been deleted from the chapter. So only some of the concepts have been retained in the chapter as per the current syllabus. So those concepts are morphology, what is morphology, what is the need for morphology, and about inflorescence, types of inflorescence, the flower and various worlds of a flower, calyx, corolla, androecium and gynoecium. And in addition to that, only semi-technical description of a flowering plant has been retained. Rest all the concepts have been removed from current syllabus. Okay. So now let us discuss what is semi-technical description of a flowering plant. So we usually describe a flowering plant using various morphological characters. We know that flowering plant has got various morphological characters. So based on these morphological characters, we describe a flower or we give a proper description. So whenever we describe a flower, the description should be very brief and it should be very simple. The description should be very brief, it should be simple, and it should be given in a scientific language. Description should be given in a scientific language. And it has to be presented, the description has to be presented in a proper sequence. It has to be presented in a proper sequence. So these has to be kept in mind. These factors has to be kept in mind whenever you are describing or giving a semi-technical description of a flowering plant. It should be brief, it should be simple, scientific language has to be used, and it should be represented or presented in a proper sequence. So we will see how can we represent or how can we describe a flowering plant. Okay. So what is the rule? What are the rules that has to be followed while describing a flowering plant? So that is that we are going to study especially in semi-technical description of a flowering plant. So we will see how a semi-technical description of a flowering plant has to be presented. Okay. So for semi-technical description of a flowering plant, so first we have to give the description about the habit of a plant. About the habit of a plant. So what do you mean by term habit? Habit is whether the plant is a herb, it is a shrub, or it is a tree. So representing whether the plant is a herb, shrub, or a tree indicates habit. And you have to note down that there is difference between habit and habitat. Habitat is a dwelling place. Habit is the form of a plant, whether it is a herb, shrub, or a tree. Then after representing or after describing the flower, especially the habit of a flowering plant, then we have to describe about the vegetative characters of a flowering plant. So what are the vegetative characters of a flowering plant? Description about the vegetative parts. So what are the vegetative parts of a flowering plant? The vegetative parts may be roots. Vegetative parts are root, stem. Okay, these are the vegetative parts. So we have to describe about root. What type of root system the plant has. Then we have to describe about the stem. How is the stem of a plant? Whichever plant you are going to describe technically, we have to note down how is the stem of a plant. And after noting down how is the stem of a plant, we have to note down how the leaves are arranged. What type of leaves are present and how the leaves are arranged. Mode of arrangement of leaves. So usually there are different types of mode of arrangement of leaves that has to be noted down. So about the stem you have to give the description. After giving description about the stem, you have to describe about the leaf and how is the arrangement of leaf. Okay, so these are some of the vegetative characters of a flower. So after describing the vegetative character of a flower, we have to note down the floral characters. So first you have to note down whether the plant produces inflorescence, or the plant has only a solitary flower. Solitary flower is single flower. Inflorescence is many flowers that are clustered together to form an inflorescence. Already we have discussed about types of inflorescence, racemose inflorescence and cymose inflorescence, and how the flowers will be arranged in racemose as well as cymose. So you have to note down in a flowering plant how is the inflorescence. So after describing the inflorescence, you have to describe about individual flower or single flower. You know that inflorescence has got cluster of flowers. Later on, after describing the inflorescence, you have to describe about the single flower. And after describing the single flower, so how to describe the single flower? Whether the flower is unisexual or whether the flower is bisexual, whether the flower has got what type of symmetry is present in a flower, whether it is asymmetrical, whether it is symmetrical, if it is symmetrical, whether it is actinomorphic or it is zygomorphic. So these details has to be given for a flower. So after describing the flower as whether it is unisexual or bisexual, whether it is actinomorphic or zygomorphic, then we have to describe about each whorl of a flower. You know that the sequence of the arrangement of whorls. The outer whorl is known as calyx. Next to the calyx is corolla. Next to corolla there is androecium, and next to androecium there is gynoecium. And you have to give the details of calyx, corolla, androecium and gynoecium. How is the calyx? So how many sepals are present, whether all these sepals are united or they are not united, they are free and distinct. Then corolla, how is the corolla? How many petals are present in corolla? And how is the estivation of the petals present in a corolla? And whether they are united or they are free and distinct. Same way, androecium, what are the number of stamens that are present? Whether the stamens are united, whether filament is united or anthers are united, that has to be described. Later on, we have to describe about the gynoecium. And in gynoecium, you know that the number of carpels, how many carpels are present in a gynoecium. And if there are more carpels, whether they are united or whether they are free and distinct. And what is the position of ovary, that also has to be described. So you know that based on the position of ovary, there are three distinct types. They are hypogynous, epigynous and perigynous. Okay. So these are the description that we can give about the flowering plant in its floral characters. So first you have to note down about the habit, then about the vegetative characters, explaining about root, stem, leaves and arrangement of leaves. Then we have to explain about the floral characters. After explaining these, we have to represent a floral diagram. So what is this floral diagram? Floral diagram is a diagrammatic representation of various parts of a flower. Okay? Diagrammatic representation of various parts of a flower. So after diagrammatic representation of various parts of a flower, we have to give the symbolic representation of various parts of a flower. Okay? Note it down. The diagrammatic representation of various parts of a flower is known as floral diagram, whereas symbolic representation of various parts of a flower is known as floral formula. So this is how in a sequence we describe a flowering plant. Habit, vegetative characters, floral diagram and floral formula. So for the floral diagram we use certain diagrammatic representation or some diagrammatic representations is there for representing a floral diagram. For the floral formula we use particular symbols. For each whorl of a flower or for each unit of a flower we have particular symbols. So first we will note down what are the symbols that we use for floral formula. Okay. So whenever you describe a flowering plant, so you know usually we observe a flowering plant, we take the flowering twig of a flowering plant having a flower in it, and then we by observing the characteristic features we note down the semi-technical description. And whenever you hold a flowering plant, the you have to hold the flowering plant in such a way that the flower that is present in a twig or in a plant, that should face towards you. Okay, flower should face towards you. So if you hold the flowering plant such that the flower is facing towards you, the position of the axis that holds the flower forms the mother axis. Okay, so suppose if this is a flowering plant, you are holding this flowering plant, there is a flower is facing towards you, you are holding this axis which holds the flower, and this is the position of mother axis. So position of mother axis is mainly represented by a dot. Position of mother axis is mainly represented by a dot. Okay. So after noting down the position of mother axis, this is especially used while writing the floral diagram. Okay, while writing the floral diagram, position of mother axis is very, very important. So with respect to the position of mother axis, we usually represent we diagrammatically represent the various folds of a flower. Now let us see what are the symbols that we use for representing a floral formula. Various symbols are used for representing a floral formula. So some of the symbols are BR, that is bracteate. BR refers to bracts. Whether the floral axis has bract or not. If the floral axis has bract, it is termed as bracteate and it is represented with BR. So BR refers to bracteate, that is presence of bract. EBR refers to ebracteate. So ebracteate means bracts are not present, lack of bract. Then, so this is a symbol that we mainly use to represent an actinomorphic flower. Actinomorphic flower. So what is an actinomorphic flower? Actinomorphic flower is such that whenever the flower is divided in any plane, it gives two equal halves. So such a flower, such a symmetry of a flower is known as actinomorphic. Then zygomorphic. So if a flower is divided only in one vertical plane, it gives two equal halves. It will not give two equal halves in any of the vertical plane other than a single vertical plane. That is known as zygomorphic. Zygomorphic. So zygomorphic is represented using this symbol. Okay, then we have to note down whether the flower is unisexual or bisexual. So if the flower is unisexual, you know that we call a flower as a unisexual flower, or we usually describe a flower as unisexual flower if it has either the calyx, if it has either the male reproductive organs or if it has only female reproductive organs. Okay. So based on the presence or absence of male and female reproductive unit. So this is a symbol that represents that is under unisexual male flower. So male flower will be having only stamens, right? It has got only stamens and it has got the word androecium. Whereas female flowers lacks androecium, they will be having only gynoecium, that is they have only carpels. Okay, so this unisexual and bisexual flowers is mainly dependent on whether the flower has got androecium or gynoecium, or whether the flower has got stamen or carpel. So such a symbol is mainly used for representing a male flower. Male flower. So male flowers have only stamens, or it has got only androecium. There is no gynoecium. Female flowers have got only gynoecium or carpels and they do not have androecium. They do not have androecium. Next, this is a symbol that is mainly used to represent the flower if it is bisexual. So what do you mean by a bisexual flower? A bisexual flower has both androecium and gynoecium. It has got both stamens as well as carpels. So such a flower is known as bisexual flower. Bisexual flower. Then after describing the flower, with the help of this formula or with the help of these symbols, we have to describe about each whorl of a flower. So, K represents the calyx. K represents the calyx. So, whenever you represent the calyx, you know that the units of the calyx are sepals. Sepals. So, first you have to observe how many sepals are there in a calyx. So, then you have to note down the number of sepals. Suppose if the calyx has got 5 sepals, okay, 5 sepals, you have to represent it as K5. Suppose if all the 5 sepals that are present in the calyx, they are united, it has to be represented by enclosing this figure or the number within the brackets. Okay. So now this refers to polysepals. That means sepals are not fused. This refers to gamosepals. That means sepals are fused. Okay. So next, corolla. Corolla is the whorl of petals. Corolla is the whorl of petals. So here also you have to represent the number of petals present in a corolla. Suppose corolla has got 5 petals. It has to be represented as C5. Okay, C5. Suppose if the corolla has got 6 petals and the 6 petals are found in 2 whorls, outer whorl and inner whorl, it has to be represented as C3 plus 3. Okay. Suppose if all the 5 petals are united, it has to be represented as C5, 5 enclosed within the brackets. Okay. Now, P refers to perianth. So, in what type of flowers we usually see perianth? Perianth is mainly seen in monocotyledonous flowers. Especially some of the flowers like lily flower, they have perianth. Okay, lily flower has got perianth. Okay, so perianth is represented by P, and the number of units of perianth, you know that units of perianth is known as tepals. So number of tepals has to be represented here. Okay, so for example, if you take lily flower has got, it doesn't have calyx, it doesn't have corolla. Calyx and corolla is fused together to form a whorl known as perianth, and in the perianth there are 2 whorls. 3 of the tepals will be arranged in the outer whorl, 3 of the tepals will be arranged in the inner whorl. So it has to be represented as 3 plus 3. Okay. 3 tepals in the outer whorl, 3 tepals in the inner whorl. So in 2 whorls, tepals are arranged. Then A refers to androecium. A refers to androecium. So here you have to clearly mention how many stamens are present. How many stamens are present? Suppose if stamens are fused together, it has to be represented by enclosing within the bracket. Then gynoecium. Gynoecium is represented by the alphabet G. G. And you know that in a gynoecium consists of carpels. The number of carpel also has to be represented. For example, if gynoecium has got 2 carpels and the 2 carpels are united, it has to be represented within the bracket. Suppose gynoecium has got 5 carpels and the 5 carpels are not united, it has to be represented G5. The carpels are not united, it is not a syncarpous condition. Then the position of ovary has to be mentioned here. So hypogynous flower, epigynous flower and perigynous flower. Okay, hypogynous, epigynous and perigynous flower has to be represented. Hypogynous is nothing but superior ovary. So superior ovary is usually represented by a bar below gynoecium. That indicates that the ovary is in the superior position. Suppose if the ovary is in inferior position, a bar or line has to be drawn above gynoecium. What does it indicate? The ovary is in inferior position. Ovary is superior, ovary is inferior. Then suppose if the units are fused, as I mentioned here, the units are fused, it has to be represented or enclosed. The number of units has to be enclosed within the brackets. Then sometimes in some of the flowers, you will come across a condition where the stamens are attached to petals. Stamens are attached to petals. So what do we refer this condition as? What do we use a terminology to describe this condition? It is known as epipetalous. Epipetalous. Epipetalous means stamens are attached, or the filament of the stamen is attached to the petal. So it is usually represented by an arc between androecium and corolla. Okay, arc between androecium and corolla. Okay, so these are some of the symbols that we use mainly to represent the floral formula. So in the next class, let us discuss about two of the families, one included under monocotyledonnae and other included under dicotyledonnae, and we will represent a semi-technical description of an example of a monocotyledonous plant as well as dicotyledonous plant.